Welcome to Faith Wonders, where real stories of faith and miracles come alive from around the world.
What if the greatest miracle didn't happen in a church, but on the sidewalk of a millionaire's mansion? A woman who had everything, wealth, power, luxury, discovered that all her fortune was worthless when her only son's life was at risk. And the one who held the key to her miracle was not a doctor, not a billionaire, but a poor boy selling lottery tickets on the street, a boy whose prayers moved heaven itself. In one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America, behind iron gates and walls covered in ivy, stood a mansion worth millions. Marble floors gleamed under golden chandeliers, and every corner displayed the symbols of wealth, paintings imported from Europe, crystal vases, even a private gallery of rare art. And yet, perhaps the most striking object in that house was not a treasure from overseas, but a statue of the Virgin Mary. It stood in a quiet corner near the main hall, carved from white stone, her face gentle and sorrowful, hands folded in prayer. The woman who owned this mansion, let's call her Margaret, had placed that statue there years ago, not out of devotion, not out of faith, but more as a decoration, something her interior designer had suggested to add an air of elegance. Margaret was a woman who had everything that the world celebrates. She was sharp in business, commanding respect and fear. She owned blocks of real estate across the city. She drove luxury cars, attended charity galas, and sat on boards that shaped the skyline of the state. From the outside, people envied her life. But those who truly knew her, or tried to, would whisper that her heart was empty. Faith had no place in her world. God was an afterthought. The statue of the Virgin Mary was dusted by the maids, but never approached by Margaret. For her, it was stone, nothing more. Every morning, as chauffeurs drove luxury cars in and out of the gates, another figure also appeared at the entrance of her mansion. A boy, barefoot, with worn clothes and eyes too old for his age, would walk slowly along the sidewalk, carrying a stack of lottery tickets. His name was Luis. He had no family wealth to fall back on, no mansion to rest in. What he had was hunger, long days of selling under the hot sun, and a heart that somehow still believed. After finishing his rounds of selling tickets each day, Luis would stop at the edge of Margaret's property. The security guards knew him. He never caused trouble. All he wanted was a moment in front of the statue of Mary that could be seen through the iron gates. The boy would press his small hands together, close his eyes, and whisper prayers. His lips moved silently, asking for little things: food for his mother, health for his younger sister, strength to keep going. And something about that sight, this child, kneeling before a statue that even its owner ignored, caught the attention of the maids, the gardeners, the drivers. They would glance at the boy with quiet respect, but Margaret never noticed. She was too busy rushing from meeting to meeting, phone pressed to her ear, her world spinning around profits and deals. But fate has its own way of breaking through walls. One autumn afternoon, Margaret's life shattered. Her only son, her pride, her heir, the one person she truly loved, collapsed suddenly during a private tennis lesson. Doctors were called, ambulances came rushing, and soon Margaret found herself in the cold halls of a hospital, staring at white coats that shook their heads with sorrow. The diagnosis was grim. The boy's condition was rare, beyond the reach of money. No specialist, no advanced technology, no amount of dollars could buy back his health. For the first time in years, Margaret felt powerless. The woman who had built empires with her ambition suddenly realized that all her millions were useless in the face of mortality. She returned home that night, walking through her empty halls. The laughter of her son was missing. The silence was unbearable. And as she turned a corner, she found herself standing, almost by accident, in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary. Her eyes lingered for a moment, but pride and disbelief pulled her away. She muttered under her breath, "If you are real, then where are you now?" And she walked past. The next day, when she returned from the hospital, exhausted and numb, she noticed something unusual. At the gates of her mansion, the little boy was kneeling again, praying before the statue. But this time, his eyes were closed tightly, his lips trembling with urgency. Margaret paused in her car, watching him. For the first time, she truly saw him, this child who had nothing, praying with a faith deeper than anything she had ever known. And in that moment, a seed of discomfort stirred inside her heart. Could it be that the boy's prayers were stronger than her millions? Could it be that heaven listened to the humble, not the powerful? Margaret shook her head, refusing the thought. But the image of Luis, his frail frame, his unwavering faith, would not leave her mind. Something had begun. A crack had formed in the walls around her soul. The days that followed felt like a waking nightmare for Margaret. Her son, Ethan, once full of laughter and careless energy, lay in a hospital bed, drained of color. Tests were run, specialists consulted, protocols escalated. She flew him across the country to the best pediatric centers. She signed checks that might have financed several small towns. Machines hummed, lights blinked, monitors tracked every irregularity. But money bought machines, not guarantees. The diagnosis, rare, aggressive, made the doctors' faces fall into the same tired line she had seen a dozen times that week. "We'll do everything," they said gently, "but we must be honest about the prognosis." One phrase, "limited options." Another, "prepare for the worst." The vocabulary of hope felt oddly thin in the mouths of white coats. At home, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. The chandeliers shone, untouched. The statue of the Virgin Mary in the main hall, stone, immaculate, watched silently as the house emptied of noise and filled with prayerless worry. Margaret found herself walking through corridors she had walked 1,000 times before, and everywhere she turned, wealth mocked her helplessness. She had created security in marble and steel. She could not buy back a heartbeat. It was during one of those exhausted returns from the hospital that she first noticed the boy again. He had been there before, a nameless presence at the edge of her property. Luis, the ticket boy, with dirt-creased palms and a gaze that refused pity. Every afternoon, after his rounds, he would pause at the iron gate, fold his hands, and stand very still before the statue he could only see through the slats. The maids had told her about him, harmless, devout, persistent. She had shrugged him off as part of the scenery of the block. Another poor boy, another quiet ritual. Now, with the raw ache inside her chest, she watched him differently. On that evening, he stood with his head bowed in the amber light of the street lamp. Rain had started to stitch the pavement. It did not seem to bother him. He prayed as if he were having a conversation with someone who always listened. Whatever words he spoke were soft and private, yet the rhythm of his plea, steady, patient, unembellished, gnawed at something deep and stubborn inside Margaret. She rolled the car to the curb and sat with the engine ticking. For the first time in her life, she felt oddly small. Her success, her trophies, the titles she'd earned, all of it shrank beside the sight of that child praying on a wet sidewalk. She opened the door. "Why do you keep coming here?" she asked, Before she could stop herself, the voice that came out sounded rougher than she intended, less businesslike, more human. The boy startled, then looked up. His clothes were simple, but his eyes were steady. "Ma'am," he answered, "why do you pray at that statue every day?" Margaret tried to keep the question plain, as if she were only curious about a habit, but she wanted to sound less like an accusation. She wanted to sound less like herself. Luis hesitated, then spoke with a clarity that surprised her. "I have been dreaming," he said. "Every night, I see a sick little boy in a big house. He has toys on a shelf and a blue blanket with stars. I don't know where the house is. The lady in my dream, she wears white and has a sad smile. She tells me to pray for him. She says he will need prayers and that I must not stop." Margaret felt her throat tighten. The blue blanket, Ethan's blue blanket, had been on his bed long before his illness. The tiny model airplane on the shelf, the crooked dinosaur toy, details she had placed there in the quiet hours while he slept, echoed in the boy's words like a mirror. "You don't know this boy," she said slowly. Luis shook his head. "No, ma'am. I never met him, but the lady said it's important. She said, 'Be faithful.'" Margaret realized she had been holding the question of faith like a grudge for years. The boy's simple obedience to a dream felt dangerous in its purity. She should have sent him away. She should have locked her gate and resumed her life of contracts and conferences. Instead, she did something she had not done in a long time. She invited him to come inside. "You can come in if you want," she said, the words awkward but earnest. "Not inside the house, the hospital, if you want to pray with him." He blinked, then nodded as if she were naming the most natural thing in the world. "I will. Thank you." Luis arrived at the hospital the next day, hands folded, carrying nothing but a paper packet of lottery tickets, an intensity Margaret had never seen in any of her boardroom adversaries. He sat by Ethan's bed and took the child's small hand in his rough palm. He did not speak long prayers. He spoke as if he were telling a friend about ordinary things: school books, a street corner, a woman's pastry she couldn't forget. But between the small talk, there were moments of silence, and in those silences, he prayed like a man who had no pretense. Days blurred into nights. Machines tracked, doctors conferred. On a night that tasted like iron and fear, the monitors hissed, and the team warned that Ethan's vitals were failing. Machines beeped more urgently, nurses moved with quiet, choreographed panic. Margaret sat with her own hands clenched so hard her knuckles went white. Luis stayed. He pressed his forehead to Ethan's and whispered, voice low and no longer rehearsed, "Mother said you are brave. She said she watches. Please stay." Margaret watched him, this small, improbable man of faith, and something in her loosened. She found herself doing what she had been too proud to do. She prayed. Not with language learned for public moments, not with scripted sentences. She prayed with a naked, pleading honesty. If there is a God, if there is a mother watching, help, please. The clock hands crawled, the monitors quivered, then slowly, miraculously, Ethan's breath steadied. Color returned like a tide, slow and stubborn. Nurses exchanged glances of incredulous relief. A doctor ran tests and, after a long pause, said words Margaret had not expected to hear. "His biomarkers are improving. We can't explain it medically. Keep watching, but he's stabilizing." When morning washed light through the blinds, Ethan opened his eyes and smiled at Margaret. It was a small smile, tired but unmistakable. Margaret found her own tears on her cheeks. She had thought she had purchased everything worth having. Instead, she had been given something that could not be transacted. The city called it a recovery. Some called it luck. Others called it coincidence. Margaret called it a beginning. She watched Luis with a new respect, not for any worldly achievement, but for the courage to believe when believing cost nothing and yet seemed to change everything. In the weeks that followed, the walls of the mansion felt different. The statue in the hall was no longer a prop. Margaret would find herself pausing at its presence, thinking of a boy who sold lottery tickets and of a child who had almost gone. She felt a fissure of humility open in her chest, and through that crack, light came in. She had expected miracles to come with fanfare, announcements, a return on investment. What she had not expected was that a poor boy's quiet obedience to a dream could become the hinge on which her entire life turned. The days stretched into weeks, and every moment in the mansion felt heavy with dread. The woman's son lay in his hospital bed, frail and pale, the machines beside him humming a tune of despair. She tried everything: specialists from abroad, experimental treatments, even spiritual healers who promised miracles for money. Yet nothing worked. Each night when the mansion fell silent, she found herself drawn, almost against her will, to the window that overlooked the garden where the statue of the Virgin Mary stood. For years, it had been nothing more than decoration, a piece of marble she barely noticed. But now, in the soft glow of the moonlight, the statue seemed alive, almost watching her. Still, she could not bring herself to pray. Pride and doubt weighed her down. One afternoon, as she left the hospital exhausted, she saw him again, the poor boy with the stack of lottery tickets. But instead of approaching the wealthy passers-by, he walked straight to the hospital's small chapel. Curious, she followed. There, she saw him kneel before the image of the Virgin, whispering words of simple faith. "Mother Mary, please, help him. Please heal the boy. Don't let him die." She froze. This child, who had nothing, was praying not for himself, but for her son. A rush of emotions flooded her: shame, gratitude, confusion. How could a boy abandoned by society have more faith than she, with all her wealth? The days followed. She noticed the boy kept appearing, sometimes outside the hospital, sometimes at the gates of her mansion. Always after selling his last ticket, he would go to the statue and kneel in prayer. Rain or shine, day after day, he came. And something began to change. Not in the hospital charts. Her son's condition remained critical, but in her heart. She started joining him. At first, she would stand from a distance, her arms crossed, skeptical. But gradually, she found herself kneeling beside him, awkwardly repeating his words, "Virgin Mary, please help us." It felt foreign, almost childish, yet strangely comforting. One night, as she prayed, she noticed the boy's face. His eyes were closed, his expression serene, as though he were speaking to someone real, someone listening. It was a peace she had never known in her entire life, not even in her wealthiest, happiest days. And for the first time in years, she felt tears run down her cheeks. "Why? Why are you praying for my son?" she whispered to him one evening. The boy looked up, surprised by the question. His answer was simple, almost disarming. "Because I believe God listens to children, and I believe the Virgin Mary is his mother and ours too. She cares." Those words pierced her heart like an arrow. She thought of her own son, fragile and fading in his hospital bed. She thought of the decades she had lived, chasing business deals, building empires, yet leaving her soul starving. all her power, all her money, and yet here she was, helpless, brought to her knees by the faith of a child. And then, it happened. One morning, as she sat by her son's bed, she noticed something different. His breathing was steadier, his color returning. The doctors, puzzled, said it was unexpected improvement. By the end of the week, the machines were removed. He was eating, laughing weakly, asking for his favorite toy. The woman was overwhelmed. The doctors had no medical explanation. It must be his strong will, they said. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't willpower. It was prayer. She returned home with her son and, almost instinctively, went straight to the statue in her garden. The boy was already there, waiting, his hands folded. She dropped to her knees beside him and whispered, thank you, Virgin Mary." In that moment, something inside her broke. The hardness, the pride, the disbelief. And in its place grew something she had long lost, faith. But the miracle was not just the healing of her son, it was the healing of her soul. She began changing in ways her staff, her neighbors, even her business partners noticed. No longer the cold, distant woman, she became softer, more generous. She gave to the poor, opened a shelter for homeless children, and every evening, without fail, prayed by the statue with the boy who had taught her how to believe. The mansion, once a fortress of loneliness, became a house of light. Visitors came not to admire her wealth, but to join her in prayer. And her son, once close to death, grew strong, carrying within him the memory of a miracle that science could never explain. She often looked back on the days when she ignored the Virgin's statue in her garden, how blind she had been, to live surrounded by marble walls, yet empty in spirit. Now she knew, faith was the true treasure, and the poor boy, the one society overlooked, had been heaven's messenger. And whenever she was asked about her son's healing, she would simply smile and say, "It wasn't me, it wasn't the doctors, it was prayer and the intercession of Our Lady." Her story spread, whispered from family to family, church to church. Many who had lost faith found it again after hearing her testimony. And the boy? He continued selling tickets during the day, but in the evenings he was never alone. By his side was the woman who had once thought she needed nothing, now transformed by the very faith she once ignored. The miracle had not only saved her son, it had saved her. The years that followed were no longer measured in wealth, contracts, or possessions, but in prayers, in moments of grace, and in the countless lives touched by one woman's transformation. Her mansion, once a silent fortress, became a place of gathering. Families came to kneel in the garden, children lit candles at the feet of the Virgin's statue, and neighbors whispered stories of the miracle that had taken place. The wealthy woman, now no longer known for her riches, but for her faith, opened her home not as a palace of marble, but as a refuge of hope. The poor found food, the lonely found company, and the brokenhearted found a place to rest. Her son, now strong and full of life, often played in that same garden where the Virgin's statue stood. Sometimes he would stop mid-play, look up at the face of Mary carved in stone, and smile, as though remembering the unseen hands that had once lifted him from death's door. And the boy, the little lottery seller whose prayers had shaken heaven, remained a part of their lives. Though still poor by the world's standards, he carried a wealth that no money could buy, the faith of a child, pure and unshaken. Side by side with the woman, he continued to pray each evening, a quiet testimony that miracles are not bound by status or power. But the miracle was never meant for them alone. Word of what happened spread beyond the city, beyond the country, until strangers from across the world came seeking solace. Some arrived skeptical, curious to see if the rumors were true. Others came with heavy hearts, parents of sick children, widows in grief, men and women crushed by despair. They came to see the mansion, yes, but more than that, they came to feel the presence that had turned one woman's wealth into a story of faith. And many left changed. Some spoke of peace they could not explain, others of healings both seen and unseen. For what truly mattered was not the statue of stone nor the mansion of marble, but the reminder that heaven listens, not to riches, but to prayer. Her testimony touched hearts far more than any sermon ever could, for hers was not theory, but lived experience, pain, loss, humility, and finally, grace. And so the story lives on, whispered from lips to lips, from generation to generation, a reminder that miracles often come in unexpected ways, through unexpected people, that sometimes the poor evangelize the rich, and the simple confound the wise. As you listen now, perhaps you wonder, could such a miracle happen in my life? Could heaven listen to me too? The answer is simple. Yes. The Virgin Mary does not wait for grand palaces or perfect prayers. She waits for hearts that are open, even broken. She listens to the cries of a child on the street, just as she listens to the whispered plea of a mother in despair. And if you allow her, she will intercede for you too. So tonight, wherever you are, take a moment, close your eyes, whisper from your heart, even if it is just a few words. Virgin Mary, intercede for us. It does not matter if your voice trembles or if your faith feels weak. What matters is that you try. For prayer, no matter how small, opens the door to heaven. And if you have witnessed a miracle, big or small, share it. Speak it aloud. For testimonies like this story give hope to others who are still waiting, still struggling, still searching for light in the darkness. Because the truth is, miracles are not just stories of the past. They are happening even now, in hidden corners, through ordinary people, through the faith of children, through the tears of mothers, through the intercession of Our Lady. This is not just the story of a wealthy woman and a poor boy. It is a story for you, for me, for all of us. A reminder that no matter how far we have strayed, no matter how hardened our hearts have become, heaven is always only one prayer away. So as we close this story, let me invite you. Write in the comments where you are watching from. Share your intentions, your struggles, your hopes, and with faith, type these words, Virgin Mary, intercede for us. Let this video not just be something you watch, but a prayer you join. And may the same grace that transformed a mansion of stone into a house of faith touch your life, your family, your heart. Because miracles still happen, and the next one could be yours.